I was late to the most important dinner of my life, and I still stopped to give my lunch and my cashmere scarf to a shivering stranger on a park bench. I honestly thought I'd just detonated my future in the space of 60 seconds. Then I walked into a mansion where the floors echoed like a cathedral, and the man at the head of the table was the same one I'd helped on the green. That was the night I learned what kind of test really counts, and who was grading me the whole time. The message that started it wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. It came from a law firm, with a crest instead of a logo, and a tone colder than the paper it would have been printed on, if anyone in that world still used paper. Mr. Graham Whitaker requests the presence of his son, Mr. Ethan Whitaker, and Miss Maya Collins, for dinner at his private residence. Graham Whitaker, finance legend, builder of a sprawling empire that seemed to own a little piece of everything, and a ghost. He'd retreated from public life a decade earlier, emerging only in rumors. Eccentric, exacting, brilliant, ruthless, untouchable. I'd been with Ethan for 2 years and had never met him. Honestly, most people spoke about him like he was a tale told by men in suits to scare interns into excellence. The week before the dinner, my life turned into a rehearsal. Ethan paced our tiny living room like a lawyer prepping a witness, except the witness was me. "Maya, listen to me," he said, organizing my life into bullet points with the desperation of a son trying to thread a needle that had shrunk his whole childhood. "Don't bring up your nonprofit unless asked. He thinks charity is what people do to feel better about losing. If he asks about your parents, keep it. Concise. No speeches about growing up on library books. Stick to safe topics, art auctions, economic history, maybe the Whitaker Foundation's museum wing. Never politics. Wear the navy dress and the scarf. He notices fabrics, and whatever you do, do not be late. He believes tardiness is a disorder of the mind." I tried to laugh it off, but the laugh sounded like a cough. I ironed the dress twice. I practiced answers in the bathroom mirror, the way you mouth a prayer you're not sure you believe. I could feel an invisible measuring tape around me, vocabulary, posture, eye contact, pedigree, as if humanity itself were a resume to be stapled and offered with a smile. On the day, Ethan went ahead to set the stage. I took the train. The station was only a mile from the estate. I told myself a walk would calm me down. It did at first. The town looked manicured enough to pass inspection by a god who collected hedges. Gates hid estates, and names I'd only ever seen in business articles were probably drinking old wine behind those hedges, discussing the markets like the weather. I kept my eyes on the sidewalk and my brain on the script Ethan had drilled into me. I had 19 minutes. That's when I saw him. He was an interruption in a perfect picture. An older man on a bench near a pocket park. Jacket too thin for the air, hands trying to pull warmth from themselves. A face mapped with years that hadn't been kind. In another life, in another week, maybe I would have kept walking. But my grandmother's sentence rose like a tide inside me. The measure of your character is how you treat someone who can do nothing for you. And the reflex that had gotten me into nonprofit work over a safer salary kicked in. I stepped off the path. "Sir, are you okay?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle so he wouldn't have to defend himself from pity. He looked up with eyes so blue and steady they seemed borrowed from a younger man. "Just cold," he said, voice rough. "Missed the shelter's lunch. I had exactly one sandwich, turkey and Swiss on wheat, wrapped in wax paper because my life doesn't include bento boxes and tiny cucumbers. I handed it to him. He hesitated, then nodded and accepted it like a formal exchange. He still shivered. I unwound my scarf, the soft cashmere piece Ethan had insisted on because it whispered the right things about taste, and laid it over his shoulders. He looked down at it, then back at me, through a look that felt like a searchlight. "You're very kind," he said. "And late, I think." He was right. My stomach fell through the sidewalk. I squeaked a thanks, wished him well, and hurried away, running the rest of the block in heels that did not want to be part of my choices. The Whitaker gates were two black iron monoliths braided with a gold W, like a warning and a welcome. I pressed the intercom. There was a silence so long it felt like a test. Then the gates rolled back, with the quiet confidence of very expensive machinery. The driveway curved under oak trees that had seen more money than most countries. The house rose out of the land like the house had been there first, and the land had merely agreed to fit around it. Ethan was waiting under the portico, pale as copy paper, pacing lines into the stone. He looked at me, and fear hardened into anger. 17 minutes, he said. Not hello. 17? He hates tardiness. I started to explain about the bench, the sandwich, the cold, but his gaze snapped to my bare neck. "Where's the scarf?" "I gave it to him," I said. The words were small but heavy. He blinked once, twice. "You gave a $700 scarf to a stranger on your way to dinner with my father," he said, like he was translating a sentence from a language he despised. "Do you understand what is at stake?" Under the anger, I could see the boy who'd grown up with a father who used clocks as weapons. I could also see the man who had asked me to put down parts of myself, like they were optional accessories. The old me might have shrunk. The me I was trying to be simply breathed. "I understand someone was cold and hungry," I said, "and I'm sorry I'm late." The doors opened. A butler appeared, tall and thin enough to be a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence. "Mr. Whitaker will see you now." Ethan grabbed my hand like a drowning man grabbing a rope. "Let me talk," he whispered. "Smile. Be perfect. Please, Maya." The foyer was large enough to hold my entire apartment building, tiled in black and white that clicked under expensive shoes. Portraits lined the walls, evaluating us through oil paint. The air felt curated. The butler led us to a pair of doors, paused like an usher at a theater, and pushed them open. The dining room was a soundstage for power. A mahogany table stretched so far a different climate lived at the other end. A chandelier hung over it like a captured constellation. At the head of the table sat a man in a dark jacket, a single place setting before him like a ceremony. He lifted a hand to adjust something at his neck, and time stopped. My scarf. The exact shade of blue Ethan had said worked with my eyes, rested on his shoulders. Everything in me went still. Ethan's whispering died. He followed my gaze, and the blood left his face as if called away by name. "Father?" he said, his voice cracking down the middle. The man didn't look at his son. He looked at me and smiled, and it was the same smile I'd seen on the bench, warm and tired and amused by the world. "Welcome, Miss Collins," he said. "Please come in. Forgive my appearance earlier. An old habit." Old habit. My brain tried to connect the park bench to the empire at the head of the table and made a sound like a bad radio. Ethan actually swayed. "That was you," he whispered, half to me, half to the universe that was clearly conspiring against his plans. Graham finally turned to his son, and his voice changed temperature. You, of all people, know what I value, he said. Not performance, not polish. Character when no one important is watching. He gestured down the length of the empty chairs. This room has hosted master classes in manners from men who could buy cities. They perform beautifully. It is still only a performance. Then he turned back to me, warmth returning like a light switched on. And then a young woman, already late to meet a difficult old man, saw a stranger who was cold and hungry and chose warmth over appearances. He motioned to the chair at his right. I walked the long aisle like a strange kind of bride. Ethan sat at the far end, looking small in a room designed to make everyone else feel small. Dinner arrived on silent wheels. Conversation did too, but it belonged to me and Graham. He didn't ask the questions I'd rehearsed for. He asked what I was reading. He asked about the community garden my nonprofit was building on a reclaimed lot between two stubborn buildings, about the teens who'd adopted tomato plants like pets, about the night our shed got broken into and our volunteers showed up with flashlights and tea and jokes until morning. He asked where I learned to show up. I told him about my parents, a nurse and a teacher who paid bills late sometimes, but never compassion, who made casseroles stretch to feed a neighbor grieving a layoff, who measured success in systems fixed and people fed, not in square footage. Graham listened with the patience of someone who understood time differently. He asked sharp questions, not to trap me, but to walk farther with me. He was not what I'd prepared for. He was not what Ethan had prepared me for. Between the main course and dessert, he lifted the scarf from his shoulders, folded it into a neat square, and set it near my plate. "This is yours," he said, eyes twinkling with a mischief that made him look younger. It did the job. The butler pretended not to smile. Ethan didn't speak until coffee. When he did, his voice was careful. "Father, Graham lifted one finger without looking at him, and Ethan's words fell like birds that had hit glass. It should have made me angry on Ethan's behalf. Strangely, it didn't. Not yet. Because in that moment it was clear to me that Graham wasn't just evaluating me. He was teaching his son out loud, with me as the lesson plan. He was drawing a map with a bright arrow. Values go here. When we rose to leave, Graham finally faced his son fully. "You have chosen well," he said softly. "Do not make the mistake of underestimating what you do not understand. Your place in my company and in my life is secure tonight, less for your performance than for hers." He turned to me. "Miss Collins, I hope you will keep insisting on substance in a family that has sometimes confused shine with light." The ride home was an ocean without sound. In our living room, Ethan sat on the edge of the couch, and the posture fell off him like a costume. He cried in a way that had nothing to do with self-pity and everything to do with being exhausted from trying to be a shape that fit someone else's template. "I have been terrified for so long," he said, "and I made the terror everyone else's problem. I'm sorry for the porch. I'm sorry for the rules. I'm sorry for asking you to fold yourself into my father's idea of acceptability." I sat beside him and chose honesty. "I won't carry fear for you," I said, "but I will stand next to you while you put it down." That might be the whole story if life ended in dining rooms. It didn't. 3 things happened in the weeks that followed that stretched this into a season I could never have predicted. First, Graham invited me, just me, to the estate on a Tuesday afternoon. No suits, no staff in formation. He met me in a room that was smaller, lined with books instead of paintings. windows open to a garden where everything looked like it had been told it could grow however it wanted, and then did. He poured tea. "No tests," he said. "Just curiosity." We talked for 2 hours about power and its bad habits. He told me he'd been running versions of that bench test for years. Not always as literally, but always as intentionally. "I have watched very important people be very unimportant in the moments that count," he said. "I have watched invisible people hold the world together." He didn't say it like a confession. He said it like a data point he trusted more than the markets. Second, Ethan's older brother, Lucas, the one who'd been disowned for a marriage his father called unsuitable, called me. He'd heard about the dinner. The family grapevine bloomed quickly in wealthy soil. He wanted to meet for coffee. He was kinder than the family stories made him sound, and angrier than he knew what to do with. He asked me point blank if Graham had softened. I told him what I'd seen, a man who weaponized tests but also seemed tired of the blood they drew. Lucas looked at me like I'd told him his least favorite teacher had learned how to smile. "Be careful," he said. "He loves his games." Then he paid for my coffee with a 20 he crumpled like a grudge. Third, my nonprofit got an anonymous donation routed through a shell of a shell that could only be one person. It came with a condition written in a single line: expand the garden, hire the teens. It was enough to hire 5. We hired 8 anyway, and figured we'd convince the universe of the math later. When I mentioned it to Graham in an email, polite, professional, grateful, he replied with exactly 5 words: invest where returns are human. Ethan and I began couples therapy, which is the least cinematic thing you can do after a cinematic dinner, and also the most effective. He started separating his father's voice from his own. It turned out that his opinions were quieter, but steadier. He apologized to me again, not by speech this time, but by how he behaved when the world pressed the wrong buttons. Fewer scripts, more listening, less rescue by control. Graham invited us both back for dinner a month later, but this time we weren't alone. At the far end of that long table sat a woman in her 70s, wearing a cardigan like armor and a wedding band that caught the light the way honest things do. Graham introduced her as Mrs. Singh, a retired math teacher who volunteered at a literacy center. He asked her questions with the same respect he'd shown me, and I watched Ethan watch his father be human with someone who could do nothing for him. I watched something unclench in Ethan's face. After dinner, in the library, Graham opened a drawer and handed Ethan a thin folder. Inside was a letter, handwritten, dated 15 years earlier, the year Lucas got disowned. "For when I remember that control is not love," the first line read. Graham had written it to himself and never sent it. I watched Ethan read his father's handwriting and saw grief pass through him, then something like relief. It didn't fix the years. It didn't need to. It named them. In the middle of all that, a storm rolled through my nonprofit's neighborhood that knocked down half our garden beds and every trellis like a cheap metaphor. Volunteers showed up anyway, teens in hoodies laughing as they hauled broken wood and wet soil, neighbors offering coffee and hands. I sent Graham a photo of Ethan knee-deep in mud, holding a busted tomato cage over his head like a crown. Graham sent back a single sentence: "That's the heir I was hoping to see." The tabloids got a photo of me and Graham walking out of a community meeting together and tried to make a story about a mysterious new advisor. It made me snort into my tea. Graham laughed the way people do when they remember they don't owe the world an explanation.
He wrote me a note in his awful, charming pen. Let them invent. We can invest. We got married 3 months later in my parents' backyard under strings of warm bulbs that made the early evening look like it had chosen to be kind.
Graham came in a navy suit that fit like a remembered promise. He carried my scarf draped over his arm like a relic and put it around my mother's shoulders when the breeze threatened to join the ceremony. Lucas came and stayed on the edge, then stepped in for cake. He hugged Ethan like a brother and me like a truce. During toasts, Ethan stood up, voice steady, and thanked my parents for raising me as if decency were oxygen. He thanked Graham for passing the only test that mattered back to the people who taught him how to give it. And he laughed at himself, a sound that didn't flinch. If you want the epilogue that looks like a headline, here it is. A year later, Graham invited me to sit on a small advisory board for the Whitaker Foundation with 2 rules. Never agree with him, because he is him, and never forget that metrics are only ever proxies for people. We made grants that didn't just slap names on buildings, but put lights on in places that needed them. And yes, the bench is still part of his rituals. He told me, with a grin that belonged to a boy who'd found a good prank and a better lesson, that he occasionally sends his most polished visitors past it to see if they notice what they are not paid to notice. If you want the epilogue that feels like a life, it's quieter. It's Saturday mornings at the garden where Ethan turns compost with teens who teach him slang he cannot safely use. It's Lucas dropping by with a bag of oranges and leaving with a bag of tomatoes. It's my mother texting me a photo of a casserole for a neighbor and writing, "Your grandmother would be satisfied," and me writing back, "She'd say, add more pepper." It's Graham sitting on a folding chair at a harvest potluck eating chili out of a paper bowl and telling a kid with dirt under his nails that he's going to be somebody, and the kid believing him because he believes himself. People ask what I learned that night at the mansion, and sometimes I give the short answer. I failed the test I'd been warned about and passed the one I didn't know mattered. The longer answer is this: money distorts mirrors. It makes people bigger or smaller than they are. It convinces some of us that shine equals light, and others that hunger is a moral failure instead of a logistical one. It turns time into a tyrant. But money doesn't rewrite the rules that make us human. You don't need a chandelier to see character. You need a park bench, a cold day, a sandwich, and a choice, especially when you think no one who matters is watching. I was late. I chose to be kind anyway. The door that opened because of that choice didn't lead into wealth. It led deeper into my own life. If you're standing at a gate right now, rehearsing lines you think will buy you entry, maybe look around first. There might be someone on a bench who needs what you already have. Give it. Be late for the kind of thing that doesn't close when it matters. The tables you end up at will be the right ones. And if you ever find yourself walking into a room where power is carved into wood and silence, look for the person at the head of the table who still knows how to smile like a person. If you can't find them, be them. The rest will sort itself out.